Hi, Phil Aston here from Now Spinning Magazine with another episode of the podcast. And I'm very pleased to welcome back Martin Popoff, author extraordinaire and musicologist. And on this episode, we're going to talk about Deep Purple, the Morse years, all about Steve Morse. Now, both of us have very recently compiled like a top 20 Morse period list of what we feel are the best tracks from this period of the band, and even ranked the albums as well. However, when we were both discussing this, we realized that there's a different dynamic in how we look back at this period of the band's history, which is vast and deep, in that when we look about the Blackmore period or whatever else, it's so much easier to pick those classic tracks out of the ether, where it is with the Steve Morse ones. So we thought we'd, rather than just compare each other's top 20, which I'll put links to on the YouTube channel and on my website so you can compare them after this broadcast, is how we look back on this period, and why is it that when we pick any of these albums, it isn't as easy to pick those top tracks as it might be when you look back at Machine Head, for example.
Yeah, this was a tough exercise, and what bore it out, as I was doing my list, because I had to do my list for Goldmine magazine, right? And so it's up there, and it's they've got the video clips in it and all that. I've got it on my second computer screen here. But what I found interesting about doing this list was my lack of confidence in really being able to decide which songs to put on there because of the consistency of this catalog. And I was actually looking forward to when I stuck this up on Facebook and shared it all over the place and saw what came back. And, what came back was mostly, people agreeing, oh, glad that's on there, glad that's really high and all that stuff. But, there were a few trends here and there where people talked about songs that maybe weren't on there that they thought should have been on there. So I thought, well, I suppose if we went just beyond Martin and Phil and we got, another 100 people who are Deep Purple fans to sort this out, you'd eventually, of course, mathematically, no matter how many people you pick, you would end up with a correct answer.
Very true.
But yeah, it's an interesting catalog, and I suppose I've got it broken up a little bit into eras here. But I don't know. I'll stop there. I'll let you comment. And
I think the fan base of Deep Purple, I mean, the demographic is older than it was in the 70s. That demographic then were probably living at home with their parents, and music was just all encompassing, all involving. You didn't have to worry about probably paying the rent or putting the food on the table. It was just music. You probably went to work perhaps, or you were still at school, but it was just music. So you absorbed the albums, which, to be fair, all those albums in that period only had 7 songs on them. Even the live album only had 7 tracks on it. So you only had 7 songs to get your head around, and they were all drastically different than each other. Now, that demographic is a lot older, with mortgages, jobs and careers and children and all the rest of it. And all the albums have got 12 tracks on at least. And there's more of a merging of those songs, and you don't have as much time to sit down and perhaps listen to an album multiple times. So for me, Perpendicular is the one which I can, because it was so different. Blackmore had left. They were coming around on tour. The set list was dramatically different. And the songs were, on that particular album, were very diverse and stood out. The Aviator being very different to Sometimes I Feel Like Screaming, different to Rosa's Cantina, for example. Whereas other ones, like Rapture of the Deep, there was more of a merging of styles, and the cream of the songs on an album, apart from the title track, which they toured extensively, even though I put my list up, and those of you who watched my own YouTube channel video on this, as I look through the track listings, I'll be honest, as a purple nut, I don't feel I know the albums as well as I know the older ones.
That's a really good point. I mean, you made a number of good points there. So number one, these albums have lots more songs on them, so that's one thing. And in the old days, like you say, I mean, basically there were 1/100th the amount of albums coming out in any given year that there is now. And also, I think with Purple, with specifically the Blackmore era, and actually, frankly, not really on Come Taste the Band. You definitely had songs that were more based around the riff itself on those albums. Production was much easier to understand and cleaner and simpler. You're right. You had a lot of, so this is a big one. You had a lot of variety between songs, but what Purple has sort of morphed into quietly, silently, sophisticatedly over this course of, what do we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 albums, plus the quite horrible Turning to Crime album. Yeah. So we've got seven albums of new material. What I notice, and you mentioned Sometimes I Feel Like Screaming, which if I look at my list, I believe I put that number 1. Yep. No, 2. I put it number 2. Seventh Heaven, I put number 1. So I was listening to Sometimes I Feel Like Screaming the other day. I was walking around listening to this record, Perpendicular. And, so one thing I notice as well is that that's a perfect example of a song where they have so many different parts within the songs, mellow parts, heavy parts. And the other thing is, you think of the way you mathematically looked at heaviness as a kid, or at least we did. When I listen to a lot of these current period Deep Purple songs, number one, lots of parts, but number two, not particularly based on riff. Number three, can't really pin whether these parts are heavy or not heavy in a lot of cases. And I was trying to analyze why that is, right? And part of it is, over time, they've gotten better at basically everything. And one thing they've gotten even better at is that meld between heavy rhythm guitar type organ from Don Airey on most of these, and the guitar, because Steve Morse has quite heavy tone. In fact, he has kind of a heavier tone than Richie ever had, in a way. Like there's a lot of distortion to it. And I noticed you even get that heavy tone on many of his soloing situations as well. So he could solo and be playing high up the fretboard, and it could be quite heavy sounding, quite electronic or electric. So that happens a lot as well. And I was trying to analyze further why these parts that seemed pretty heavy, and like I say, they're somewhere, like I say, they're getting better at everything, right? So one of the things they're better at is confounding us on the definition of riff versus chordal. So we can't even tell whether something's a riff or a chord or a chord progression anymore with Deep Purple, because they're in every department, they're getting more sophisticated. And then I'm listening to Ian Pace's drumming and going, okay, we've always thought of Ian Pace as a guy with a light touch, a jazzy touch, right? Mm-hmm. And so I'm thinking, is this drumming heavy? And how is it recorded? And how is Bob Ezrin recording this stuff? Is he recording it heavy? And I'm going, well, the drums kind of sound pretty rocking and muscular, but is Ian playing that way? The guitars sound heavy, but is Steve Morse thinking in a heavy metal state of mind? The Don Airey's organ sounds heavy, but how is he thinking? He's kind of comedic at times, right? Yeah. And then something I've learned over the years from when we did the Metal Evolution episodes, to think about extreme vocals, heaviness of vocal, right? And Ian Gillan was never that guy. No. He would do these screams, and he's known for, I invented the heavy metal scream and all this stuff. But even his screams are a little comedic and a little mixed with falsetto sometimes. So, but when he sings, almost all the time when he sings, he's not singing particularly aggressively, and he does that even less now. So I'm thinking, okay, well, I guess it's not particularly heavy metal vocal. So that's kind of the complication I found, and I love the way you framed it. And I think what I'm saying is I'm making my excuse for agreeing with you that it's hard to remember a lot of these songs. Titles, again, wordplay. Sometimes the titles are not particularly clear on what's going on, although they're sort of in the average zone with that. They're not Robert Plant, put it that way, or Led Zeppelin, where the titles very often don't tell you what's going on. So I'll turn it back over to you.
That's okay. I agree with you, Martin. I think that because of the way that we probably grew up with Deep Purple, there is a kind of like an aspect of being very driven by the riff. It's what you expect. The riff starts, then there's a drum roll, and then they keep repeating the riff, and the band joins in, the bass comes in, and there's going to be a vocal. In this period of Deep Purple, there isn't any of that, really. I mean, my first two I just reversed to yours. So I put Sometimes I Feel Like Screaming at number 1, and I put Seventh Heaven at number 2.
Wow.
Okay. And the reason I picked Seventh Heaven is probably because it starts with a real standalone riff. And I suppose if we look at Rapture of the Deep, which I put at number 3, it's because it has a very memorable riff and entry point for the listener to get in and kind of almost try and second guess where it's going. Because if you look at classic Purple, whether it's Space Trucking or Burn or Smoke on the Water or Lazy, they're all, as you said, driven by a riff and then a verse, then a chorus, then a riff and a solo. A lot of the Morse period of Deep Purple is quite complex. You could say they were closer to being like a progressive rock band rather than a hard rock heavy metal band. And the song titles, as you say, if you look at them, Power of the Moon, we're all the same in the dark. They don't give anything away. Whereas obviously song titles like Space Trucking or Burn told you without hearing a note that this was probably not a ballad. Whereas now you're not quite sure what it's going to be. And even when it starts, you're still not quite sure where it's going to go. Sometimes you feel like Screaming has a structure where you can second guess there's going to be a harder chorus, or it's going to shift gear in the solo. But a lot of the other songs, Remission Impossible, Dancing in My Sleep, you're not quite sure where they're heading. They could suddenly go somewhere else, and Morse will take them in that other direction without being a typical riff. It'll be like a run rather than a riff. And also Gillan's vocals, the melody he picks is not one that's obvious. I find that with continued listening to this period of Deep Purple, you hear things that you didn't hear before, whereas you kind of feel like some of the older catalogue is like putting on your favorite pair of slippers because you just know them so well, which I know some people who part of the no Blackmore, no Purple camp will say that's because the songs are better. But I think they're missing the point that this is a very rich seam of the Purple catalogue that each time you run it past your senses, there's a good chance you'll pick up something that you didn't hear before.
Yeah. That whole, I mean, you could talk for hours about the idea of what is a good song, right? The songs are better. That's such an abstract, hard to figure out thing. Yet people know when they hear a hooky song on an album, if you sat down a bunch of people in a listening session and said, pick out the hit, most people are going to kind of sort that out. And sometimes it's super obvious, like Walk This Way or Bohemian Rhapsody or Sweet Action or Ballroom Blitz. Sometimes it just hits you right over the head. Definitely these songs are not hitting you right over the head, but I would never argue that they were lesser songs. And it's such a funny thing. Like Ian, and I mean Roger might have said this at the odd time as well, but Ian definitely, I love when he frames the idea of what they're writing about, saying, I've interviewed him many times, and he said things like, because I remember we're writing about what we care about as 50-year-old men, right? And now, now they're 70, right? But I remember specifically him explaining that as the first time a rock star ever said that to me. It's like, well, we're writing about what we think about now and what we care about now. And I don't know. I've never heard anybody kind of debate this or talk about it, but I wonder sometimes we'll get to Steve Morse, but I wonder if sometimes fans subconsciously or unconsciously, or they haven't thought about it much, or it's just like something's perturbing them, but they don't know what it is. And I wonder if part of or one element that is perturbing them is the wordplay and the lyrics. And are the lyrics sometimes too smarty pants? And are they too off the cuff, or are they too unnovel? Or novel, like unconventional, I suppose. Because you always hear, again, you hear about how, they're smart guys, they're readers, they sit there and do their crossword puzzles and all that stuff. You hear those quotes, right? So they love wordplay, and you can tell, and they really do provoke us with some kind of, like they're prodding us to get into a fight with them over words. Certainly when it comes, many times when it comes to song titles. But you think of Now What, Bananas, Whoosh, exclamation mark, like Now What, question mark, exclamation mark. These ridiculous album covers, like there's some bad album covers here as well, right? Yeah. So you feel like, at least on a wordplay thing, sometimes I think the fans, although they haven't articulated it, they know they're upset about something, a few different things. But I think one of the things that they haven't said that they're upset about, that I think they are upset about, is sometimes they think Ian is a little bit too smart for his britches, or some of the things he's saying are a little bit too Ian Gillan, or he's falling into a caricature of Ian Gillan, I suppose, over the years.
Yeah, and as you said, well, they're in a different place. As you say, they're writing. I remember when Perpendicular came out, and they were asked for a, was it Mojo magazine, or it could have been Q magazine in the UK back then, saying they were asked to review new releases, and they said we can't really comment because we're in our 50s and we can't really see the world through the eyes of someone in their 20s. And as you say, they're in their late 70s now. But also, back then, the early evolution of the band, they would have been sitting around thinking, right, we need a good opener. We need a good opener for the stage. We need something fast to open the set with. They don't do that now, I shouldn't imagine. They don't think like that. They're not going to write about fast cars or whatever else. They've moved on. And I think Gillan, as you say, whatever he's been reading about, whatever he's bugged about, he'll just write something that is very wordy. And they also, during this period, had a guitarist who could play any style, and a lot of Steve Morse's solo back catalogue, which is vast, but his music there is very fusion based, very jazz rock fusion based, whether he brings in bits of country or classical music. And he hasn't kind of detached himself from that when he joined Deep Purple. He didn't think, well, right, this is more of a blues based rock band, this is going to be a different. He's just carried on being himself. If you listen to some of his solo albums, you could imagine them, you could transpose those, and Gillan could stick some of his clever lyrics on, and they'd probably work. The Dixie Dregs stuff, there's a similarity. There's a more complex nature to how Morse writes music.
Yeah, I'll comment on Steve, but just before we leave wordplay, the other thing, the thought that came to me as I was seeing the Facebook comments come in on my list, and people would complain about things like Any Fool Know That, or Razzle Dazzle. Like, I didn't put Razzle Dazzle on my list, but I remember my visceral reaction to Razzle Dazzle when it came out as a song, right? And it didn't really strike me until I read these Facebook comments. The thought that, to me, this is the Lost in Hollywood syndrome. Okay, so the idea is that I think they had a lot of song titles that were on songs that were better than the song title, that I could tell that some of these comments, some of these people commenting, that they were already ticked off at the song just based on the song title before they even got to the song. So a song called like Any Fool Know That, F-U-L-E and K-N-O, and even opening their first record back with the song called Vavoom, Ted the Mechanic. So you got Vavoom on there. So a heavy metal fan's going to think that's stupid putting Vavoom in a title. Then it's colon. So now they got a complicated title. And then they say mechanic and they say a guy named Ted. So it's not a particularly English sounding name. And the word mechanic is a song you don't associate putting into something like a Deep Purple song. So a title. So the idea is a little bit that, and Pete and I recently did an episode on what makes music timeless, right? So what takes a song away from being timeless is mentioning the beginnings of the internet or having fax machine tones and stuff like that. Yeah. Saying the word mechanic in a Deep Purple song title is just incongruous. And I think I really feel that this all starts with, or a greater example of it is Rainbow, Lost in Hollywood, right? So you think Rainbow and Hollywood don't go together at all. Like, what are they talking about? California is about as far away as you can get from
Wizards.
England, Wizards, Ronnie James Dio. And you've got this Lost in Hollywood song. It's an absolute corker, and I consider it the greatest Rainbow song of all time, but it ain't called Stargazer, right? It ain't called Light in the Black, right? And so I think a wall goes up, One Night in Vegas, right? You think as soon as you hear that, you think of, oh boy, the Ian Gillan stories of, a drunken night on the town. Razzle Dazzle. Like I say, when I heard that, it's like, I don't want Deep Purple to call a song Razzle Dazzle. So I'm already annoyed, right? So anyways, I'll leave it there. We'll get back to Steve Morse. Any comment on that idea?
That's you raise a very good point, because we think about the imagery of the song titles, as I said earlier, when you read Highway Star, Burn, Stormbringer, they before you heard them, you were imagining that, what they might be like because of the type of music that Deep Purple were generating, Speed King, etc. They conjured up. You thought, well, that isn't going to be a ballad, or this is going to be a riff-driven song, or it's going to be great live, before you heard a note. And you're right that, some of the things like Hip Boots and stuff like that, Johnny's Band, you think, well, that isn't going to be like that. Before I even know what it is, that's going to be the case. And I think Après Vu and stuff, Vincent Price, which is a great track, but it's not. Well, I suppose they did Mary Long, which was a kind of an early example of Gillan taking observational stuff going on in society at the time. But yeah, you're right that a lot of the Morse period song titles follow the kind of route that Gillan was going and has gone in some of his solo stuff, really.
That's a good point. Yeah, I mean, I'm still on the first album. We got Rose's Cantina, Hey Cisco. These flashy song titles that don't sound particularly, gothic English, we invented heavy metal, Deep Purple, right? The Perpendicular Waltz. So you got a pun in there, and you've got the title again. Cascades, colon, I'm not your lover, right? So a complicated song title. So that's pretty annoying. But to go back to address your point about Steve Morse, Steve's, it's an interesting one. You go, so what is his style? And I listened to a pile of riffs, chordal patterns, and a pile of solos and stuff. And number one, he's just super tasteful and interesting, and he will compose a beautiful, beautiful solo. But that's not a style, right? That's just somebody who has taste and who is a sophisticated guitar player. So you can almost throw that out as or you can diminish that or play that down and say, okay, I'm still not on board with Steve Morse, right? So what is his style? That the one thing that I noticed that he does, which gives him a style all his own, is the little chattery fills between the notes that he does, right? Mm-hmm. And he goes, So I almost consider that like a drum fill. Because it's a little rhythmic thing he does, and it's kind of more like a bell and whistle or a gimmick or a trick, rather than a full style. It's because it's so specific, right? You're really talking about something specific. Other than that, I mean, you would know better. I mean, what do you think his style is? Does he have a style beyond that?
I think he's a very, very obviously he's completely different guitarist to Blackmore Bolin or Simon McBride, who were all more blues based. Bolin was kind of jazz orientated as well, but nothing like Steve Morse. Steve Morse, although the entry point note and the one he's going to might be on the blues scale, the bits in between are completely off that and drag along and go through a jazz classical route. And as you say, it's those little fills. It always puts something in that space. And everything he does, even the riffs, some of the riffs you think when you listen to some of the songs, they could probably be more simplified. The introduction to a lot of the songs in this period of Purple are quite complex because of how many extra little chords or fills he puts in. To everything. Gillan sings a line, and then instead of it just being a couple of chords for it to all float on before we get to the chorus, it doesn't do that. It kind of goes down a staircase, comes up the other side, goes down a waterfall. He puts everything in it. He's a very busy player, and he does that in everything, whether it's country picking stuff off Dixie Drexy. Again, he'll just fill it with all notes that are all on target, but he's a completely opposite guitarist where you say less is more. Morse is like more. That's what he does. Even on the solo on Sometimes I Feel Like Screaming, which is very melodic. As it gets to the climax of that song, he starts to put in more stuff around the motif that he's designed in that song, and which is why I think it hit a nerve with so many people, is because it has such a memorable guitar melody towards the end, which he repeats over and over. But he's still then, especially live, he puts in, as you say, those trills and those extra notes where he can. It's who he is.
Yeah. Just before we go on, I just want to show some of these strange album covers, because I did take all this stuff out. So that's one of the more ridiculous ones, right? So we got now what?
Yeah.
Caps, all caps on now.
Yeah.
And then what? And then they don't bother to put the question mark and the exclamation mark after the what. They stick it in the middle of the page. And then on the spine, they do it correctly. They do now what correctly on the spine. Yes. And I noticed they've also got an exclamation mark in the as for the L in Purple. And then this one got a lot of abuse too, right? Bananas. Yeah. So, this one got a lot of abuse for just the silliness of the title. And then, we're just going to take this stock photo of these guys in India or Pakistan or whatever it is on the banana truck kind of thing, right? So that's framed up with an ad from Byrne. I want to add one more thing about Steve Morse that I feel is part of his style. It's a joyous style. It's a joyous, sublime sort of style, right? It's burbly. You said the word waterfall. I mean, it sounds like you're under a nice waterfall in Hawaii or something. You're sitting there, behind the waterfall in a nice little lagoon pool or something, right? So he does have a style that's kind of like not messianic, but more like ecstatic, at a religious experience, sort of ecstatic. It's kind of a very happy, buoyant, I'm being uplifted into the heavens sort of style when he's soloing.
Yeah, he's not a melancholy guitar player at all, even, Above and Beyond and songs which were, dedicated to John Lord. It's still, his playing is still very uplifting. Going back to the song titles, don't you think it's almost as if with Ritchie Blackmore gone, they just wanted to completely empty what had gone before? Because if you think about all these song titles, especially even with Perpendicular, if Ritchie had still been in the band, none of those song titles would have got through, would they? I can't imagine Blackmore saying he wouldn't have allowed a song called Ted the Mechanic, or it just wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, that's such a good point, right? He would just say, that's not, it's like Ronnie James Dio saying, that's a bit jolly, right? That was one of his favorite quotes, right? Someone would bring in something a little commercially and say, that's a bit jolly. And I'm looking now at Abandon, which is probably my favorite overall of these albums. But, we've got Evil Louie on there. What's Her Name? So it's more wordplay, right? Like squeezing the words together. I put What's Her Name on my list, but again, I feel that's one that people look at that and they're already in a bad mood, right? They're already in a bad mood. They don't know how to spell it. So the writers don't write it. That's another funny thing I've noticed in life, right? People avoid trying to type Motorhead or Wasp or Motley Crue because they don't want to look up how to stick in that umlaut, right?
Yeah,
it happens all the time, right? So you look for other ways to say these things. But yeah, Any Fool Know That to kick off the album. So yeah, you definitely got I Got Your Number, Walk On, Picture, Silver Tongue, Bananas. So another interesting thing about this I found is again, as we get older, I touched on it earlier, this idea of the productions, right? So the productions here, it's funny. You've got kind of three eras with this stuff. You've got the self-produced albums, the first two, which sound great. One is, I guess, produced by Deep Purple. The other one's produced by Deep Purple and Roger Glover. Mm-hmm. And then you got the two Michael Bradford albums. And to me, both of those, I know they kind of had some complaints about them. I think Bananas is the one that people like the least, maybe out of all of these records. And again, I think the title and the album cover had a lot to do with that.
Yeah, I agree.
But I find that one to be the only one out of all of these that seems to be incorrect in a small way. And to me, it's a little bit bright and it's lacking a little bottom end, but I don't think Rapture of the Deep sounds that way. So all of a sudden, it's almost like they turned the bass up almost too much on Rapture of the Deep. So there is no Michael Bradford sound. And then obviously you get into the Bob Ezrin years, where again, the production is really super interesting. It's almost like a metaphor for the sophistication of Steve Morse, the sophistication of the lyrics, the sophistication of the complicated songs, the sophistication of not knowing what's riff and what's chordal, not knowing what's a heavy song, the sophistication of debating, are they a prog band? Are they a jam band?
Yeah.
Not so much jam band, but I would say prog band. Or what else would you call them? Symphonic band. They're almost like symphonic using traditional instruments. But the funny thing is that Bob Ezrin's productions are so sophisticated and beautiful sounding that you start debating, are they heavy enough? It's a weird debate that goes on about, and then but when you break it down, you go, everything is all heavy here, but I don't know what here is sending me the signals that this isn't super heavy. I don't know what it is. And it might really have to do also with that abstract thing that you mentioned about Steve. And we know it exists with Ian and Roger, this idea of we don't like heavy metal. And Steve is more like, I don't think heavy metal. So they can turn in songs that sound like heavy metal on a surface level, but their brains aren't wired that way. So there's some disconnect there where it's holding the listener back from thinking they're heavy metal.
Yeah, I think they don't. I mean, I suppose we don't really know, but they don't write for the stage anymore. They write, obviously, as you say, they look inward and they write what they want to write. I remember hearing Now What for the first time, because they'd obviously fallen out with the music business in respect, or they'd fallen out with the idea that it was even worth releasing albums, because after Rapture of the Deep, they just stopped, didn't they? And they just basically went on tour forever, doing Machine Head tours and basically just going round and round in circles. And then until they realised maybe everyone else around us from our peer group seems to be releasing something, maybe we should. So they came back with Now What. And I remember putting time aside to listen to Now What, quite loud on my home stereo, and loved it. And I thought the sound was immaculate and everything. But I'll be honest and say that at the end of it, apart from Hell to Pay, which had been played on Planet Rock a lot, I couldn't really remember a lot of it. Whereas because the music was complex, it was very prog. The keyboard sound was very different to what I expected from Don Airey. And this was a new. I loved it, but I couldn't have said straight away, oh, this track or that track. It had, like a lot of complex music or it had gone in, but there wasn't like obvious vocal motifs or choruses or middle eights to latch onto, apart from Hell to Pay, which I knew, which was probably the most obvious structured rock song on the album, in a way.
Part of what's going on there, Phil, in your head is that you are remembering. They will fade because they are just parts, and if you don't keep playing them, but you're remembering parts that you really liked, but those parts can be, one part in this song, another part in that song, another part in that song. And I noticed that when making my list for Goldmine, it was the same thing. It's like, I love this song because of that part. It's one of my favorite parts, period. But wow, I didn't know they had a mellow verse in this song, because I thought it was a heavy song. And it's like, I was surprised, surprising myself. And then, Steve would solo over a different pile of music, and they'd have like a couple of break sections and a little jammy section, and then you'd hear a keyboard solo that you forgot was even in there, sort of thing.
Yeah. Totally.
That happens a lot. And then, on the subject of Don Airey, like Don Airey is just like John Lord plus 40%. He's like, I'm going to give you everything John Lord gave you. I'm going to also give you Don Airey, and I'm going to give you some, to be even more meta and sophisticated, I'm going to give you this abstract cross between John Lord and Don Airey, right? Way more sounds, amazing sounds. But in the computer age, you think, you're always suspicious of how they're getting these sounds, right?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't seem as authentic as you hear the old storied way of how they got, these various sounds, right? But yeah, pretty interesting. So yeah, you go through these records, and it's because you don't have one or two motifs to latch onto like you would on an early unsophisticated Deep Purple song, which I guess a lot of fans are saying are better songs, written better or whatever. They're just written with less stuff in them, right? And that just causes us to be flummoxed about what to say about these albums.
Well, yeah, I mean, songs like Dancing in My Sleep, the bonus track off Whoosh, is probably more immediate because it's more simple. But in some ways, I mean, not everyone will agree with this at all. But the music from this period, it kind of aligns itself with some of the latter day bands like Opeth, in that it's dense and complex, and it takes multiple listens to, as you say, what was it? Well, the song I said before we went live, Man Alive from Whoosh. That wasn't on my list, didn't make my top 20, but when I was playing it today, I really thought, I love that bit. And I love that part. And like 69 off Abandon, I like the bit when it drops back with John Lord's solo. So as you say, there are certain parts, musical interludes, a bit like, as I say, bands like Opeth, where you can't really dip into what you think is the beginning or the middle or the end of a song, because there are different things going on. So in a way, they've challenged us as rock fans, as we've got older, that the music has become deeper and more complex and deserves further listens. And actually your ears don't get tired of it. Whereas you might do, if you hear another live version of Space Trucking or something, you think, well, I know where this is going. Whereas these, they're not obvious.
Here's what I said about Man Alive. Here's Purple again, surprising us brilliantly in their vintage years, writing a dystopian song that is up-tempo, not all that heavy, more like a hard-hitting 4/4 semi-epic you might get out of semi-prog bands like Saga or Magnum. That's the other thing. They're generally giving us all these parts in 4/4 time, but they're prone to drop beats here and there. They just don't want to write songs that are difficult to get a handle on, but they will at will be able to drop beats and keep groovy at it. As is very often the case when Purple go prog, the chord changes are both novel and melancholy. There's also a soundtracky quiet bit at the beginning, middle, and end, with the result being yet another song that doesn't follow any rules other than using Purple's signature instrumentation and Ezrin's found high fidelity sound that he seems to have reserved just for them. That's something I find interesting as well, is that Bob Ezrin, because Bob Ezrin has a lot of albums in his career that don't sound all that great. The entire Alice Cooper catalog, the original band, those records don't sound very good. But with Purple, it's almost like he's dug in and pulled out the essence of who Steve Morse is and Don Airey is and Ian Pace is, and not so much the bass, not so much the vocals, but and just just put a stamp on these records and given them a sound that I've never heard anybody else sound like this. And then like I say, the other point here is like, this sounds like Magnum. It sounds like Uriah Heep. I have a little bit of the same problem with. I'll play a song and I'll go, wow, that's I think that's a heavy metal song, but it's so beautiful and so melodic, and so there's so much keyboards in it, but yet those are heavy metal keyboards. Those are distorted, keyboards. So it's like, and then it's like I can't even tell the keyboards apart from the guitars because they're both doing kind of a distortion pedal sound, and they're both high up in the mix. And they're kind of playing. They're the two rhythm guitarists in this band. So yeah, it's funny. I'm trying to figure out heaviness of this band is all.
The other thing I'd like to touch before we finish is the live aspect of how this band operated, because obviously the first album came out in '96, Perpendicular, and obviously that tour they completely revamped the live set with some Purple classics that had never been played live before. Well, Pictures of Home. They also did Rat Back Blue and Bloodsucker and all sorts of things. But they also put a lot of Perpendicular into the set. And as we've just been saying, the Morse period of songwriting is very different, more complex than the previous incarnation of Purple. And the Morse years are the longest period of the band being in existence. What's interesting with you doing your Goldmine post and me doing mine is the love there is from fans for this period now. A lot of people really love Steve Morse and miss him and love all this thing. I feel that the band, the key members, should have had more confidence in keeping some of these Steve Morse period songs in the set, period. Things like Sometimes I Feel Like Screaming. I don't feel that should have ever dropped out. It was a new classic for the band. And each time they came round, they just put a few token tracks in from the most recent album, but everything else was pulled back. And it was the Machine Head dominated tracks as usual. I mean, what are your thoughts on how they catered for this period?
That's a really good point. Be more like Steve Harris, right? Just hammer us with the new songs and just say, look, we're going to do this. We're proud of this album. And yeah, you're right. I guess that's almost like a management question in a way. It's like manage the set list to make sure that over time we build 5, 6, 7 track, classic tracks that everybody's going to remember, and they're going to remember them because we play them more as well. I feel like I feel like most of the fans would probably pick Perpendicular and maybe Abandon. I mean, I really plump for Abandon a lot. I love Abandon. I think it's really amazing near the back half of the album, and I say that in my list. But I think part of that is time is passing, but I think part of that is also that subtly, those songs are a little closer to being able to wrap your head around. And it's funny. I mentioned earlier, I never really thought about this. I think Perfect Strangers, House of Blue Light, Slaves and Masters, Battle Rages On are essentially all at the same sort of simple song structure level as all the early stuff. And it's only Come Taste the Band that kind of stands out, where I think Come Taste the Band is almost like the spiritual heir of this era, I think.
Yeah. Because I mean, there's lots of people who've mentioned stuff like it's a shame they never had the courage even to do like special gigs where they just did the Steve Morse period live, a set of Steve Morse period. Obviously, they'd have to stick in Smoke on the Water, obviously, but they had enough to do that. I feel that one of the sad things was every time you went to see them, you'd only see songs from the current album, and the following year, well, whenever they drop those. And it would be the usual things, and I'm sure it's not Blackmore. Gillan was obviously more happy and relaxed in singing the more recent stuff. But obviously there was a fear that if we do this, we'll upset our hardcore fans. But I wonder whether they really felt like they knew the fans enough to know that actually there was a lot of people in the audience that wanted them to do Sometimes I Feel Like Screaming, to expect it to be in the set.
Yeah, you wonder. You wonder. I mean, they've got such a great catalog with Steve of lots of records that you almost wonder if they could go on a tour and say this is all we're going to do, and this is for this fairly
Yeah.
large fan base that would be the fans who love the Steve Morse era kind of thing. Like it'd be for the deep scholarly Deep Purple fans who have accepted all this stuff. But yeah, there's tons and tons of material there, and you'd see a great jazzy performance of a show. You'd see amazing arrangements brought to life. You'd see amazing instrumentation. Obviously, you'd be seeing solos that these members like Don or Steve actually composed and wrote, or whatever, how much writing they do, but it's their stamp. They're going to give you the solo that they believe in, more rather than having to fit something in. I guess that's one of the things we haven't really mentioned is one of the reasons people complain about Steve is that when he plays / the old stuff, it's not close enough to what Blackmore did or whatever, right? So that's a funny thing as well. But yeah, I don't know. I just feel I always bring this catalog up as being one of the best examples of a heritage act doing their best music now, and that whole idea of it's kind of logical, and it makes sense that everybody gets better at their craft over time. So why don't bands make their best music as they get older and older, and it just gets better and better and better? In most occupations, that's kind of how it works, right? Although in most occupations as well, you get to a point where someone says he's losing his edge, he's making mistakes, he's probably should retire soon, he's gonna get someone killed, kind of thing, right? So it's funny that way as well. But yeah, we both know people complain about this era, and it's hard, and we're trying to wrap our heads around why, right?
I think there's also, as we started, there's everything is available now. I mean, if I go back to the 70s, and what I was buying in the late 70s, a lot of bands like that I grew up with, the Slades, the Mott the Hooples, all their albums were out of print. Things were only in print for a few years. They're then gone. You couldn't hear them. There was no internet. You couldn't go and find them. They were just gone. Whereas now everything is available all at once. And this part of the catalogue of a band like Deep Purple isn't something you play. Well, I've played it, now what on Monday, and that's enough. It's a kind of album going back again to our youth, where you would come home from work or school, and you'd put it on every night. You play Now What every night, and by the end of the week, it would have gone in further. It's in fact, it's closer to Genesis or Pink Floyd or Yes in the complexity of the arrangements of the songs than it is to your typical heavy metal band. And so I think that this period of the band deserves more time. It isn't. I think saying to somebody, "Oh, you need to listen to Whoosh by Deep Purple," you feel like saying you need to give it time, like an Opeth album. You need to give it a week, live with it, and it will show you different sides of the band that you didn't know existed beyond, like Woman from Tokyo or Child in Time. There's different aspects. Gillan's lyrics, they might be a bit too clever now, but equally it shows where he is in his life, and they are different to some of the stuff. I mean, I totally get what you said earlier about things like Razzle Dazzle and stuff. Obviously, I was just the same as you. I thought, I can always guess what this is like, and it was. But overall, that's not the case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Razzle Dazzle brings up another point. It's like, there are, every music fan is going to have certain styles or things about a band that's going to rub them the wrong way. And one thing we do know Deep Purple likes to do is that barrel house piano sort of boogie sound, right?
The rock and roll.
And that's something I don't really want to hear a lot of. And Razzle Dazzle kind of feels like one of those. So every time they do one of those, I'm not crazy about it. Anytime they do kind of a slow blues, I'm not crazy about it. But most of the rest of it, it's like, wow, this is like super interesting and super fresh. So
do you think, I mean, that's because Gillan, he's also, just before we finish, he's also obviously gone back and done his Javelin stuff. He seems more aware of his kind of rock and roll Elvis roots. And it's almost as if he, amongst all of this kind of proggy, more complex, deeper stuff, he feels he has to just put that side of his personality, which again, it's like as if the Gillan band have crept in through the back door. You know, he wants to show that side of the depth of the history of rock, really.
Yeah, it's a good point. And, you know, he can't, because it is the CD age and you can do these long albums, and they're having fun. They love Bob Ezrin, and they're creative, and Bob Ezrin is super opinionated and creative himself. He's getting his, you know, rolling up his sleeves and getting right into the songs as well. So, you know, they're having a good time, and they realize it's almost like, you know, putting that in is almost like a metaphor for what I said about Don Airy. It's like John Lord plus 40%, right? It's like, well, this is just every style of deeper. You're going to get everything from us, right? And sometimes it's going to be a buried part that you may barely even know exists, and that's the only time you're going to get that part, but it's not the whole song.
Well, I totally agree, and I think on that note, we'll pull the show to an end. But I'd like to just say to everyone watching this, just dive in to the Steve Morse years of Deep Purple. Obviously, check out Martin's Gold Mine article where he lists his 20 tracks, and mine as well on the Now Spinning website. We've got very different lists in some ways. The ones at the top are the same. But the other thing is that as we started this, and why we did this podcast, was it's actually very difficult to come up with a concise and perfect list of what you feel is the best Steve Morse period Deep Purple songs, because there's so many different aspects to them, which on repeated listens shows something else. It's a bit like the early Deep Purple might be a painting of a fruit bowl or a scene of a seascape, whereas this period of Deep Purple there's a lot more going on in the painting, and every time you walk past it, you spot something else.
Yeah, the Garden of Earthly Delights, right? That whole thing, right? Just yeah. like a is his name David Patchett, who does the cathedral artworks?
Yeah. It's a bit like that, isn't it? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so what are you up to at the moment, Martin? Have you got what books are you working on?
Let's see. So coming out soon will be the Blue Oyster Cult panel book, Dominance and Submission. That's through Weimer, my UK publisher. Also soon will be my the Who Quadrophenia book from Motor Books. So that's going to be a big, you know, in a slipcase. I think it's in a slipcase, maybe not, but a big hardcover coffee table book. So that's a 50th anniversary book, like my Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon one. That one's coming out soon. I've got Kiss at 50 coming out in the fall. That's going to be a big, nice hardcover, full color throughout book as well. So yeah, I'm working on a few other things I probably shouldn't announce, but and then we've got our video channel, The Contrarians, and I've got my weekly History in 5 Songs with Martin Popoff, the next episode, which will go up. What day is it today? So it'll go up tomorrow. Will be about all about instrumentals, what we like about them, what we don't like about them, why we like them, why we don't like them.
Fantastic. And people can find you at martinpopoff.com. And also there's a Facebook group, isn't there, for your 5 best songs?
History in 5 songs. Yeah, there's a Facebook group for that. There's a Facebook group for Contrarians as well. So and then my regular one. So yeah, lots of debating music stuff all over those things. So. Well,
fantastic. Well, thanks very much for your time, Martin. And thank you everyone who's tuned in for this podcast. And please check out the Now Spinning magazine website at nowspinning.co.uk. And I shall see you on my next episode. Thank you very much. Thank you. A big thank you to my guest, Martin Popoff, and thank you for tuning in to listen and watch to the Now Spinning magazine podcast with me, Phil Aston. And the Steve Morse period of Deep Purple is well worth your exploration if you're new to the band. There's lots of albums to discover, lots of songs. And as we said in our discussion, some of the songs just get better with each play. And for those of you who are not quite sure which lineup of Deep Purple to go after, or you've obviously got allegiance to certain things, to me, it's just all part of the Deep Purple family, and all of the output is worthy of a listen. There are no bad Deep Purple albums. There might be some that are slightly better than others, but they're all worthy of your time. So thank you again for tuning in. Remember to check out the website at nowspinning.co.uk. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, become a patron or YouTube member. And remember, there's a Facebook group as well. And of course, subscribe to the podcast. Thank you very much. Remember that music is the healer and the doctor. And I shall see you all very, very soon.